the 96th Academy Awards, the nominees for Best Actor were Jeffrey Wright in American Fiction, Paul Giamatti in The Holdovers, Colman Domingo in Rustin, Bradley Cooper in Maestro, and the winner, Cillian Murphy in Oppenheimer. Of these five, three were based on real people: Domingo as Bayard Rustin, Cooper as Leonard Bernstein, and Murphy as J. Robert Oppenheimer. Two of these real people were queer, Rustin and Bernstein. Of these two, one was played by an openly queer actor, Colman Domingo playing Bayard Rustin in the film Rustin. This is not a video about how I believe queer roles should be played by queer actors, partially because the topic is wildly misunderstood, but mainly because I've already done a video about it. Rather, this video is about the challenges, conflicts, and politics of advocacy through the lens of the film Rustin. How does the film wrestle with the internal dynamics of advocacy groups? How do these implications impact the social movement and its effectiveness? And why is it that sometimes your allies can be your adversaries?
Lord, I hope and pray they come today.
Bayard Rustin was the principal organizer behind the March on Washington in 1963, where Martin Luther King gave his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech.
I still have a dream.
The film Rustin, released in 2023, follows Rustin as he manages to organize the march. It was directed by George C. Wolfe, written by Julian Breese and Dustin Lance Black, and stars Colman Domingo in the titular role. Wolfe is a prominent theater director who won a Tony Award in 1993 for directing Angels in America: Millennium Approaches, and directed the film adaptation of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which was based on the August Wilson play of the same name. Breese cut his teeth writing for TV, most notably the Netflix miniseries When They See Us, based on the true story of the Central Park Five. Breese partnered with Black to write the screenplay for Rustin. Black is an LGBT rights activist and screenwriter who won an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay for the film Milk. Domingo is a prominent film, TV, and theater actor who received an Academy nomination for his lead performance as Bayard Rustin. Born in 1912 in Westchester, Pennsylvania, Bayard Rustin was raised by his grandparents and was greatly influenced by the political beliefs of his grandmother, Julia Rustin, who was a member of the NAACP. From a young age, Rustin showed great determination for civil rights that would continue throughout his entire life. When we first meet Bayard Rustin in the film, it is 1960, and he, A. Philip Randolph, played by Glenn Turman, and Ella Baker, played by Audra McDonald, are persuading Martin Luther King Jr., played by Amel Amin, who is described in the screenplay as not yet the king the world will come to know, to join in on a march on the 1960 Democratic National Convention. Throughout the 1940s, Randolph and Rustin used the threat of mass marches on Washington as a way of pressuring the government into fair working opportunities for African Americans and desegregating the armed forces. Despite King's protests, Bayard assures him that he is the man for the job, evidenced by his command of the Montgomery bus boycott, and he agrees. However, when Representative Adam Clayton Powell Jr., played by Jeffrey Wright, finds out about the march, he is offended and threatens to leak that King and Rustin are lovers. In response, Rustin writes a letter of resignation, hoping to force King into seeing who wishes him well and who does not. However, King accepts his resignation, calls off the march on the Democratic National Convention, and puts a distance between himself and Rustin. These are a swift series of sequences that all occur within the first 8 minutes of the film. It sets up the idea that Rustin will face some of his biggest hurdles put in place by the people who work alongside him. Of course, there are the larger enemies on the outside, those that are actively working against the civil rights movement. However, the film gives very little stock to them actually being the obstacles in the film. There are horrifying scenes and stories that are featured throughout to remind audiences that the larger evil is out in the world, but the film is far more interested in focusing on the inner dynamics of the members' relationships and how the politics of organizations can ultimately slow the movement down. The film takes time to show that these are not simple operations that just manifest out of nowhere. It takes deliberate and planned action in order to rally groups as large as what was seen at the March on Washington in 1963. And because the film is about Rustin's journey in organizing the march, a majority of the conflict presented to Rustin comes from within the organization itself. Despite describing advocacy movements as organizations, of which they are, it gives the false impression that these groups are monolithic entities, of which they are not. They are a group of individuals who come from diverse backgrounds, perspectives, and agendas, united by a common cause and goal. While this diversity is often an integral part of forming a grassroots movement, it can come with unique and complex challenges. Each individual is going to have their own range of opinions when it comes to the strategy, tactics, goals, and priorities of the coalition. We understand this immediately in Rustin through the sequences described earlier that led to Rustin's resignation. Representative Powell resented the idea of marching on the Democratic National Convention, but Rustin thought that the strength of their numbers must be shown.
We need you to lead us into Los Angeles.
Having worked with Randolph in the 1940s on mass marches and being disappointed when the 1941 March on Washington was called off, it was no wonder that Rustin was so eager to try again at the DNC, and it's no wonder that Powell, a politician, did not like that idea. Two men with two different ideas about how the movement should show their strength. And so these competing ideas and beliefs ultimately led to an internal conflict. These internal conflicts and divisions are often defined as infighting and have always plagued advocacy groups. You can see it on display in the 2019 French film BPM, Beats Per Minute, which takes a look at the competing opinions of the Parisian chapter of ACT UP, and we can see it on display in Rustin. People, especially those within a group that is advocating for something that they care about passionately, are going to have different opinions, which may escalate into force or aggression in order to change opinions within the organization. Infighting is seen across all advocacy groups and at all levels of the movement, from the individual to entire parties. It's important to understand that infighting is not the same as disagreeing. There are healthy challenges that can come from discussions where multiple points of views and issues are raised. It's a healthy way to keep the movement growing and checking potential imbalances of power, but infighting is fighting. It's aggressive and not helpful to the cause. It acts entirely as a disservice to the movement by causing schisms and taking time and energy away from targeting the real enemy of the group. An early scene in the film sees Rustin place his body in harm's way in order to stand up for a supporter of the civil rights movement. However, the enemy isn't an outsider, it's a young member of the movement itself. In the scene, Rustin has just stepped into the kitchen to receive some ice and overhears a character named Tyrone, played by Jamar Williams, describing to Tom, played by Gus Halper, and a crowd of others, his traumatic experience with police brutality. When Tom expresses his sympathies towards Tyrone's past, another character, Blyden, played by Grantham Colman, comes at Tom with anger.
Like we give a shit you sorry.
Ultimately, Rustin steps in, stating that pacifists must be prepared to receive violence and insists he punch him only on the left.
Symmetry.
Blyden doesn't attack, however, but leaves him with some choice words.
You're irrelevant.
Screenwriters Brees and Black craft these scenes early on in the film so that audiences understand the different relationships that each of the members have with each other and the tensions that can bubble under the surface, a tension which can cause issues for the movement as a whole. When infighting progresses past a curt exchange of words in a kitchen at a party, it can lead to several significant issues that impact the effectiveness of the advocacy group. The organization starts to develop fragmentations and divisions, and acts less as a cohesive force against the larger establishment.
We're all fighting over agendas and slogans and songs.
When the party is divided, it is weakened, and energy and resources are diverted towards the internal disputes rather than achieving the goals. Roy Wilkins, played by Chris Rock, was the executive secretary of the NAACP at the time and is positioned in the film as one of Rustin's primary antagonists, the other being Representative Powell. When the plan of a march on Washington with over 100,000 supporters is suggested to Wilkins, he refutes the idea with the help of Elias Taylor, played by Johnny Ramey, by citing previous marches of white people with less numbers that resulted in attacks with tear gas and tanks from the military. Wilkins' concern comes from a place of security and safety for his community. However, when Bayard makes an effective counter-argument to this analysis of history, his point is shut down by Wilkins when he brings up that Bayard and King are no longer communicating, substantiating his own view through his good relationship with the movement's leader. By not having King by his side, Bayard has lost credibility among his peers, and while his ideas and facts are accurate, it is understood that it will not be possible for him to organize the march without the support of King. Knowing that he must mend his relationship with King while still pushing for the, at the time, seemingly impossible goal of having over 100,000 people attend the March on Washington, Bayard visits King and his family following the assassination of Medgar Evers, the NAACP field secretary in Mississippi, who had supported Bayard's goal in the meeting with Wilkins. In this meeting with King, Bayard manages to heal the division between him and King while not wavering on his goal, which he has held since the beginning of the film.
I missed your friend.
And I you.
Disagreeing and debating are something that advocacy groups will encounter amongst its ranks and should encourage as it fosters diverse ideas and strategies. However, as seen in Rustin, infighting is something that will ultimately hurt the organization's progress. Perhaps one of the largest themes present in the film's comment on advocacy groups is the importance of representation within the organization and the power of acknowledging the intersectionality of its members. Intersectional theory was first developed and studied by Kimberly Crenshaw, an American civil rights advocate and leading scholar of critical race theory, in 1989. It suggests that the myriad of identities of an individual, be they biological, social, or cultural, are all at play with each other and shape how we interact with the world and how the world interacts with us. Intersectional theory asserts that people are often disadvantaged by multiple sources of oppression: their race, class, gender, identity, sexual orientation, religion, and other identity markers. Intersectionality recognizes that identity markers, for example, woman and black, do not exist independently from each other, and that each informs the others, often creating a complex convergence of oppression. Bayard Rustin was a gay man and lived openly as one. When Rustin told his grandmother he preferred the company of young men to girls, she simply said, "I suppose that's what you need to do."
What you see I cannot conceal.
And the film shows how this aspect of Bayard's identity, among others, is explicitly used against him by people within the party to denounce his character. Even once Bayard's position becomes undeniable by mending his relationship with King, Wilkins still wishes to oust him for fear of how Bayard's reputation would color the rest of them.
My guess is Roy is starting to build his case against me.
Later in the film, in a meeting at the March headquarters, Representative Powell asks a hypothetical question to Bayard in front of the team that has organized the march. If someone attached to the organization was detrimental to the cause, would you send them on their way? To which Bayard responds, "Of course."
Unless the person in question happened to be me.
Bayard is fully aware of Powell's leading question, as are all of the team in the room, which is why each step forward and explain just how difficult it has been to coordinate the march. All of them young members of the movement, even Blyden, who called Rustin irrelevant at the beginning of the film.
Blyden, who are the Guardians?
A fraternal order of New York City's black police.
But Powell remains steadfast in his conviction and presses on with his question of Rustin, which he tackles with one word:
Pasadena.
Powell is referring to how in 1953 Rustin was arrested in Pasadena, California for vagrancy and lewd conduct, of which he pleaded guilty to sex perversion, which is how California referred to sodomy at the time. Although Rustin was open about his sexuality in his private life, this was the first time that he had been outed publicly, which caused damages to some of his relationships with fellow activists, and, due to his arrest and his guilty plea, haunt him several years later by way of Powell. However, Rustin himself, many years before Crenshaw would define the theory, understood intersectionality and the importance of diversity in advocacy.
One of the reasons I decided that I should no longer remain in the closet came from an experience I had as a black. I walked into a bus in the South, all prepared to do what I had always done in the South: take a seat in the rear. As I was going by the second seat to go to the rear, a white child reached out for the red necktie I was wearing and pulled it, whereupon its mother said, "Don't touch her neck." Something happened, and I said to myself, if I go and sit quietly in the back of that bus now, that child who was so innocent of race relations that it was going to play with me will have seen so many blacks go in the back and sit down quietly that it's going to end up saying they like it back there. I've never seen anybody protest against it. So I said, I owe it to that child, not only to my own dignity, but I owe it to that child that it should be educated to know that blacks do not want to sit in the back. And therefore I should get arrested, letting all these white people in the bus know that I do not accept that. Now, it occurred to me shortly after that it was an absolute necessity for me to declare homosexuality. Because if I didn't, I was a part of the prejudice. I was aiding and abetting the prejudice that was a part of the effort to destroy me. And that in the long run, the only way I could be a free, whole person was to face the shit.
Here, Rustin explains that visibility is one of the first and most effective steps in advocating for his rights. He had to be open about his sexuality in order to not be complicit with the society that actively tried to oppress him as a black homosexual man. And this is addressed in the film through a masterly delivered monologue by Domingo.
Less stand because they are poorer than us, or because they are darker than us, or because they desire someone.
Similarly, Dr. Anna Hedgeman, played by CCH Pounder, also understood the importance of diversity and attempts several times throughout the film to raise her frustration with the lack of female speakers at the March on Washington, despite women playing an integral role in organizing the march and civil rights in general. The film shows that diversity in the ranks of the movement is essential in effectively advocating for civil rights.
I look at this program, I do not see one woman's name.
While critics have been able to highlight the pitfalls and traps that the film falls into, I believe that Rustin offers a compelling exploration of the challenges, conflicts, and politics within advocacy groups, bringing forth the complex dynamics that can both propel and hinder social movements. And perhaps most importantly, it shines a light on the work of Bayard Rustin and his journey as the principal organizer behind the march. A person who for far too long has been neglected in history classes and relegated to the sideline because he was openly gay. The film's most lasting impact will be its ability to introduce Bayard to many more people, including myself, and sparking renewed conversations and lessons around this man who not only had a seismic impact on the civil rights movement, but the entire world.
They either believe in freedom and justice for all, or they do not.